More than a third of millennials and Gen Zs chose to follow information that they'd got on social media, even if it was in contrast to the information and advice that they got from a qualified healthcare professional.
It's alarming.
Absolutely.
Joining me is David Henderson. David is a strategic biopharmaceutical leader and has over 2 decades of experience in the life science industry.
You have this fragmentation of information, and some of it is accurate, and we also know that some of it is inaccurate. And so as an industry, what do? Do we sit on the sidelines and observe the conversation, or do we actually get a little bit more proactive and sit within the conversation?
Hello, I'm Romain Bonjean, CEO of RoseRx, and this is Future Pharma. On this podcast series, I explore the fast-moving evolution of life sciences, technology, and the evolving patient and HCP experience. I'll be talking to industry leaders who are looking forward toward the future and understand the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. This series is brought to you by RoseRx. The future of healthcare lies in truly personalized patient and HCP journeys, and conversation like the one we have had to have will help us all get there faster. Joining me is David Henderson. David is a strategic biopharmaceutical leader and has over 2 decades of experience in the life science industry. David's well known for his 13 years at Biogen, where he rose to be managing directors for Australia and New Zealand, where he led Biogen through a growth of multiple sclerosis and spinal muscular atrophy and establishing the Alzheimer's disease portfolio. He has recently moved into the role as franchise Head Specialty Oceania at Takeda, overseeing the gastrointestinal, neuroscience, and vaccine portfolio across the region. Having worked in market across the globe, originally from Cape Town, South Africa, he now calls Sydney, Australia home. David, thanks for joining me on Future Pharma.
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with you and the audience.
I think we met at the Next Summit late last year in Sydney, and I remember one of your talk that you've done, which was really interesting. It was leading with empathy, and you had a talk around leadership in pharma and how the landscape is changing and how important empathy was. And I think it's a word that is often overused, but I'd like to hear from you if you don't mind.
You know, my curiosity started in empathy really probably 1993. I think I shared at the time, you know, I was actually present during a terrorist attack on a church. And this really got my curiosity going in that for months afterwards, I was more curious in terms of why the people would take such a radical action. And that really got me thinking about, well, how do I understand their point of view? And this is in the context of apartheid South Africa. And it was through that I became really curious of this concept of empathy. And exactly as you've mentioned in the intro, is that empathy quite often is thrown around and perhaps also misdefined as sympathy. And so, you know, maybe we should start off by let's clarifying what is empathy and what actually is sympathy. And I think, you know, a very basic explanation in my mind is that empathy is that I'm sitting alongside you and I can see what you see. I recognize your emotions, and that helps me then communicate with you on an effective level. Sympathy, on the other hand, is that perhaps I sit in your emotion with you. And then that probably influences me from an emotional point of view where perhaps I won't be able to take an objective, unbiased view of the situation.
I love that, especially how it could apply in a healthcare context.
Yes, most certainly. You know, so when we apply it to healthcare, I think there are so many positive applications, you know, both internally within organizations and how leaders lead. And then also there's an external facing component to it as well. So, you know, do we truly understand what a patient is experiencing or what that patient's family is experiencing? Do we also truly understand what a physician or a healthcare system, what their experience is, either with that system, with the therapeutic area, or from a pharma point of view is what is the experience with us as a broader industry and then specifically as the organizations? And I think being empathetic and really being curious in truly trying to understand their point of view, in my view, that actually fosters innovation. It also fosters diversity and inclusion because I'm now curious about your point of view.
Do you find modern pharma is empathetic enough, or could they do more to really go and get in the patient shoe and their loved one's shoes and accompany them on the health journey?
Hey, Roman, that's actually a really interesting question. I mean, my personal view is that I think perhaps 20, 30 years ago when I first got into the industry, I think it would be fair to say that the patient interest and the actual true understanding of what the patient and their carers or their family are experiencing was perhaps left a little bit behind in terms of where the organizations wanted to go. I think fortunately what I've observed is a greater intersection between the various functions within pharma. And that intersection really lands on the patient experience.
Patient centricity.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, it's also a term that's thrown around so frequently, we've got to be patient-centric, got to be patient-centric. I always remind myself and encourage the people I work with is that you actually need to actively take the time and seek the opportunities to spend time with a patient or within a clinic to really understand their point of view and their experience.
You're talking about this evolution from the 90s till now. Could you take the opportunity to maybe recap your journey as a pharma professional?
Yeah, sure, Roman. So, I actually entered the industry in South Africa, and it was a bit of a sliding doors moment in that I had met somebody who actually worked in healthcare, and I was quite interested in that. I came from a business and sports background and got offered this opportunity to enter the industry. And a couple of the drivers that really got me interested is, first and foremostly, I'll share that my father was actually rather unwell through most of his life. He actually developed psoriasis over his body. And I remember him and I spending some hours in our garage, in the garage at home, trying to work out, well, what potions and lotions could we even create to try and stop this itching and scaling experience that he had. And that really piqued my curiosity in terms of, well, what is the whole healthcare environment? What does it look like? And when I got the opportunity to join a pharma company in South Africa, I really jumped at it. And it was actually a really interesting role. In the sales role, I was calling on general practitioners. And in South Africa, most general practitioners also dispense from their rooms. So you have both a scientific portion of your role, but then there's also a commercial portion in terms of you'd actually
fascinating.
Take an order, yeah. And that physician would then dispense that medication. And so coming from a business background, I think that was also quite intriguing and exciting for me in terms of, oh, wow, there is this whole business model based around healthcare.
It's a fascinating concept. You mentioned your history. I come from a medical background, a long line of very traditional doctors back home in France. And even to this day, I still detect a certain patriarchal way of doing medicine. Doctors know best, and it don't trust the patient too much. And I always find this extremely obsolete, especially in view of how information is like water. Information seeps everywhere in the world. COVID digitized everyone. Like your grandma is online more than your teenage daughter, which is more worrisome, but that's for another podcast. And so the idea that the patient wouldn't come informed, probably with the wrong information, but informed nonetheless, ahead of touching the healthcare continuum is madness. Like we've seen data about a rice grower in country Vietnam knowing more about diabetic treatment than Brooklyn-based people, because they've got access to the internet and it is translated in Vietnamese, and they are 5G in the rice field of Vietnam's, and they are connected with smartphones, and they are very well aware of treatment opportunity to treat their diabetes. And these case studies keep popping, and it accelerated that digitization. All of a sudden, everyone's informed all the time. And yet you still have an entire segment of the industry that goes around going down and saying we know best, and the science is between closed door, and trust what we're doing. And that's the intersection that fascinates me. How quickly will the industry just realize that true patient centricity is to participate in this conversation?
And that also, I think, is one of the potential challenges that I see in the industry, and something that I'm really thinking about in terms of the future is you have this fragmentation of information. And some of it is accurate. And we also know that some of it is inaccurate. And so as an industry, what do we do? And I think, in some ways, we're almost at a crossroads. Do we sit on the sidelines and observe the conversation, which I think has been traditionally most of the industry's position, is let the conversation take its own course? Or do we actually get a little bit more proactive and sit within the conversation?
That's a fascinating point. And we've had a similar conversation recently. If you sit on the sideline, you actually, in a measurable way, start losing the battle, because misinformation seeps so much in healthcare that we know starting to see some metrics showing that there's delayed outcome, delayed right treatment to the right patient. I think someone was mentioning recently in California, we're seeing cancer death going back up with educated women because they postpone meaningful, effective oncological treatment after, falling under Instagram BS and basically moving the cancer from a treatable case to a non-treatable case. And the metrics is now showing in public health data. The Facebook generation is going backward despite the science going forward. So this is it's testament again and again that pharma has a responsibility as the maker of the chemistry to be part of that battle for information.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, recently I heard some statistics coming out of a Reuters conference that was held in London, specifically around like the consumer patient forum. And I think off the top of my head, it was more than a third of millennials and Gen Zs. And I don't want to pick on any demographic segment here, but it was more than a third of millennials and Gen Zs chose to follow information that they'd got on social media, even if it was in contrast to the information and advice that they got from a qualified healthcare professional.
It's alarming.
Yeah. So think about that. It's like more than a third of people decided to actually trust the voice of someone else versus somebody who is a qualified healthcare professional. And I think, to your point, if you overlay that then in terms of, well, what is the responsibility of pharma organizations, the developers, the researchers, the producers of trusted medicines? I agree. I don't think that we should sit in the stands and observe this conversation. I think in some ways we must have a duty of care.
I agree.
To be part of it.
Yeah.
The challenge obviously then is, well, how do you be part of it? But this is where also I think perhaps in the future, what we could do better as an industry is connect greater with the stakeholders in that. And that stakeholder group, I think about obviously there's the obvious choices in terms of physicians, nurses, allied healthcare staff. But what about also the healthcare system broadly? And then in addition to that, what about the patient advocacy groups? Those are perhaps voices that we should assist in terms of providing balanced and accurate information.
I agree with all the points here, but then the regs needs to evolve. I think everyone's diagnosing this shift and evolution of the health landscape, but it just doesn't follow up. The TGA rules are still extremely vague, purposefully, and Medicine Australia is still trying to adapt for a world which sounds like it's 2016, not 2026. Like they're doing some great work, but you're still you feel that whether the self-regulation or the hard edge of regulation slows us and doesn't allow us a fair fight. The moment you are a wellness apparatus or, a commercial layer, like one of those new telehealth type business, you can go for gold and go for broke because somehow there's all the loopholes for you. But when an actual compound maker with billions of dollars of tested R&D and clinical trials wants to have a voice, all of a sudden we have to walk on eggshell and be extremely careful, and the penalties are immeasurable. Yeah. And I think this needs to shift if we want to have a fair fight in making sure that in this post-truth world, the new generation has access to genuine clinical outcome that works. I mean, this is a hard language I'm using, but the more you look at it, the statistics, the scarier they get.
No, it is, Roman, and I think most in the industry almost share this frustration, if you will. I think there'd be few people in the industry would say, okay, well, we don't need any laws or any guidelines, because I think that's perhaps we're edging on the side of recklessness. However, it's how contemporary are those guidelines or laws relative to the broader environment. You mentioned Medicines Australia, and I think back to how the code of conduct has changed. More from being very prescriptive now to more principles-based,
correct,
which I think is a step in the right direction. I suppose to your question is, how does that evolve into the future? It would be interesting to see. I mean, my view is that I would think we're better placed to continue with a principled view.
I agree. Yeah.
And then us as an industry, thinking more about, well, how do we provide that accurate and balanced information in a way that still is in compliant with guidelines within the law, but also that actually it isn't just vanilla. And what I mean by that, it's
that it has to engage.
Exactly.
Like, we're going back about storytelling. We were talking about it before the show. You if you don't have the right color palette to tell and paint your story, you're not going to be very effective, and it's going to be a lot of media spend to not actually engage and navigate people. We looked at the US a lot on this, actually, which is a highly regulated environment, but that has slightly different approach, and they're a lot more comfortable going dynamically in the storytelling with, patients and stakeholders. I've recently listened to the CEO of Eli Lilly about their complete focus on direct-to-consumer journeys and trying to capture it. It was a very fascinating, liberating way of talking about a highly regulated environment still, but we're going to go straight to the source and help them navigate, and our product portfolio will accompany them across the whole lifespan. And I just thought that was a very fascinating, very novel way of talking about it.
Yeah. No, it certainly is. Yeah. I also think about, going back to the point that you mentioned earlier in terms of, you have this almost like this patriarchal view of how medicine is practiced. And some observations are also that what I see is like these different demographics of healthcare professionals emerging.
Yep.
Perhaps when I first going back to when I first entered the industry, it was certainly this patriarchal view of it, of where the healthcare professional held all the knowledge and power. Mm-hmm. And what I'm observing now more is that you have, so let's call them like the more mature generation of physicians. Yep. And then you have those almost at the middle of their career.
Yep.
And I think about, well, how do they actually absorb information, or how do they choose to receive information? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a combination of both digital, probably in person, and then you have this younger generation of physicians who are digital natives.
And they won't take a meeting.
No, completely.
They won't take a salesperson. They're actually allergic to it. And we say 40, but the barrier is getting older every year. So it's like an iceberg melting. Your in-person sales call is just going to disappear from the industry, and it's going to move to an omni-channel, very dynamic, hyper-personalized. They still want access to your chief scientific officers. They still want access to your med affair and then your opinion leader armatorium, but they're going to want to do it through their own channel in their own time. We've seen that shift globally, and it's a generation. Like, I think you won't find a healthcare professional under the age of 40 that would go and say, "Yeah, come and have a $22.50 sandwich, not a cent small, and tell me more about your sampling." I also believe we're seeing the same shift from a patient journey perspective.
Absolutely.
I think the whole new generation of, like, we're talking about millennial, and my daughters are a little young to be in that category, but they composite truth from multiple sources of information.
Yes.
And not a single one. So there's this mistrust of the single source, which is a move away from that patriarchal. So you need to have a multi-touch truth making for them to go yes. And then I think we're going to have more and more of those efforts for people to realize that's the treatment I need for my disease. Let's take action.
Yeah. One thing that I as I mentioned, that I do think about is this like fragmentation of sources of information. And so how do you actually ensure that you have accurate information across many areas? And I know a common thing that we speak about in healthcare and in pharma is this omni-channel. Mm-hmm. I'm probably viewing this more as opti-channel. So what's the optimum channel and the optimum information within that channel to reach the end user or the consumer as such? And be that consumer a patient or a healthcare provider, whichever one it is. And so if I think about the future, what I'd probably see is that it's less about longer narratives. I think it's about really crystallizing the salient point. But to crystallize that salient point, I think we probably go back to where we started our conversation, which is from a point of empathy. Mm-hmm. Because unless I really understand your point of view and standing and seeing your point of view, how can I crystallize that content and optimize it for you if I don't really have a true understanding of your needs?
I'm very interested in how it helps the go-to-market playbook, and particularly interested in how the ability to be always on across the omni or opti channel, as you talk, allows for the organization to weave and learn and iterate. In your role, where do you see this heading in the next couple of years, in the next 10 years? And what's your opinion on how much AI will help do a better job there?
AI has an incredible opportunity for us to really optimize those engagements and optimize the information across the multiple channels itself. We mentioned earlier around like the emerging or a lot of these HCPs or healthcare professionals who are young in their career. They really prefer digital communication. It doesn't mean that they are adverse to in-person communication. So with that as a context, I really see AI assisting organizations in being a lot more thoughtful and a lot more focused on the actual desire and the needs and the preferences of the healthcare professional than before. I think before, it was really about the intuition perhaps of the individual that was sitting in front of a customer to try and understand.
Correct.
Where they are in their understanding of the use of a certain therapy or the challenges that they might face in a clinical point of view. But I think AI really offers the opportunity for a greater robust 360-degree view, and then offers the opportunity to really optimize those engagements so that that level of value and trust is accelerated versus moved in perhaps slower increments, which it has been, I think, traditionally.
I love it. And I if you allow me, I nearly tie it up with your empathy comment. I think AI allows to scale empathy across all your channel. If I play that back, by being able to have that 360 view, it can deliver a personalized view that is a lot more empathetic on how your end user use and interface with your organization.
Yeah, Roman, I agree with that. I think there's also, perhaps a risk in that as well. In that what we know currently with AI is that the accuracy level varies. And so it does require that human intervention currently to ensure the accuracy and almost quality test AI itself. Going back to the risk that I think I potentially see is that currently machines cannot display empathy. They cannot sense empathy in itself. And that's the human touch. And I think that's a central point that unites the industry and the broader healthcare environment is around that emotional connection with an individual, be that a patient, a healthcare professional, somebody even within your organization. And so I think for me, it's about how do we leverage the technology to do a lot of the thinking. And then based on your point in terms of the empathy, and I think a lot of that thinking is, well, what is the optimal information delivered at the optimal time? And then it requires actually the human to bring the emotion to that.
Correct. Correct.
and really drive the value in terms of I have the right information, I'm delivering it within the right emotional construct.
Correct.
I think there's always a place for the human and the human element within this. Yeah, I don't think we could go to full digitization in terms of the way we engage with healthcare professionals or patients.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think that digital component would certainly increase into the future. I think there'd also be a greater reliance on, I'm hoping that there'd be a greater reliance on the science as the science evolves. And so therefore the need to actually provide that accurate information is highlighted. We spoke about earlier that perhaps with these fragmented communication channels, it's a real challenge for the industry to ensure of accurate, balanced information across all those channels. If I look into the future, what I'd hope is that the industry is a lot closer to the consumer, to the patient, to their caregivers as well, because I think they're also an important stakeholder in it, as well as the physicians. So, we almost become more balanced between our focus on the healthcare professional and the patient and their carer versus almost having our current preference for the healthcare professional.
I agree. I think we need to do a lot better job in talking to the patient. Going back on the 30 years career, what did you see as a culture shift?
Yeah. So, Romain, if I go back and think about, when I first entered the industry, what my observations were is that, a lot of therapies were focused on the more chronic disease areas. And in some instances, we had what I refer to as marching armies of commercial people, where it was all just about frequency. And if you were said or repeated the message frequently enough, that somehow that would generate business, and that the science would be part of the conversation, but perhaps wouldn't actually lead the conversation. So that's kind of when I started the industry. I think where the industry is now, the place it's in now, is that it's actually that science that actually is leading the conversation. And a lot of the conversation starts with the science and starts with this therapy's optimal place in a spectrum or a landscape. Mm-hmm. And I think over time, what has been proven is that if you start with the end point in mind, which is how do we better the outcomes for an individual, you have a sustainable business because the rest just follows. The concept of being a commercial organization, I think people have become more comfortable with that in terms of that organizations need to generate profit to invest in research and development. However, you cannot just be, in my view, you cannot just be purely focused on the commercials part of the business and almost devoid of the impact that you can have on someone's life.
I love it. Quick segue. You've actually, there's a role that's very important in pharma, which is medical affair. And you had some very interesting opinion about the evolving role of medical affair, which actually, I think ties up with your comment about the science being an absolute key commercial driver. Could you, for our audience, describe and talk to us a little bit more about your thoughts about the modern medical affair and where it's heading?
Yeah, so this, I think, you're referring to a publication that I co-authored with a couple of other GMs at the time, which really was a synopsis of the views of general managers within Australia as to how medical affairs can really evolve into the future. And the essence of this paper really speaks about this evolution of medical affairs. Starting off whereby I think when I first entered the industry, medical affairs almost seen as the supportive function. And in fact, they were probably the ones that were holding on the reins, so to speak, in terms of ensuring that the commercial side of the business remained within the appropriate lanes. Mm-hmm. And then we saw this adjustment to where they became more of enablers and more of a supportive function outside of a regulatory context. But of late, I think it's really, focused on that medical affairs are truly leaders in many instances.
Correct.
And this is, obviously the intersection of where the science has evolved and the need for greater medical affairs input and insights into it. And I also see a greater convergence between commercial and medical functions, whereas perhaps before they were quite separate. However, I see a greater convergence of those two functions now, obviously respecting their own appropriate remits and scope of their function.
It ties up to the conversation earlier. Essentially, if you lead with the science and the profit is on science efficacy on the right, it is the same thing ultimately. If your medical role is a commercial role.
Yes, I think like the distinction of those two roles, particularly in a rare space, probably isn't as divergent as what it was in the past. Mm-hmm. I think those roles are a lot more closely aligned than before. And I view that as a really positive development of the organization. I think also, what we spoke about in the paper was, I think broadly for medical affairs, become more comfortable with the commercial aspect of the industry itself. I think it would be fair to say, early in my career, that medical were almost shying away from the commercial aspect and the capital nature in which organizations operate in terms of their profit-generating entities. Whereas now I do certainly see those commercial leaders, now what I do see, those medical leaders who really stand out, they have a level of comfort with the commercial construct of an organization.
David, thank you very much for being here today. At the end of each show, we normally ask our guests 5 quick-fire questions. First one would be, what's your biggest industry prediction for 2026?
Perhaps not my biggest prediction for 2026, but my biggest hope is that we actually do have the HTA, the Health Technology Assessment reform in Australia.
Could you talk a little bit more what the HTA is?
Yeah, so the Health Technology Assessment is effectively a framework that the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme uses to assess the cost effectiveness of medicines. Currently where we're at is that this process is dated, it's more than 30 years old, and I think it'd be fair to say that it does not keep pace with the current level of advancement in technology and science itself. And so the government has agreed to a revision, and now we're in the process of hopefully that some of these proposed changes will actually be enacted.
What industry challenge keeps you up at night?
I really think it's this fragmentation of information resources. I really think that's the one thing that keeps me up at night. The other one obviously relates back to the HTA and in terms of providing timely access to innovative treatments within Australia and also New Zealand, in fact, as well. I think, unless the HTA revisions take place, I fear that Australians will be missing out on innovative therapies.
Well, they're still missing out. I think it's 73% of innovative therapies are not covered by the PBS.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is terrifying.
It is terrifying. And then the wait for the innovative therapies, it's over 400 days, which between the time of registration versus reimbursement. So it's quite a lot.
Yeah. What's a piece of advice that you would give a new leader?
Remain curious.
Love it.
That is one thing. Just remain curious. Roman, if I can add to that, I was given some incredible advice, and I'm deeply appreciative of this mentor still. When I took on the role of general manager, this individual gave me the advice and said to me, it will be probably the most loneliest role you'll ever have in your career. And I was at first a little bit perplexed. I was like, but hang on, you engaging with people and the whole organization all the time. But never a true word was spoken because people certainly view your organizational authority in a different view. And perhaps they don't disclose as freely to you what you actually should be hearing. Even if you create a psychologically safe environment, I think people are more guarded. And so what I've learned is to be really curious and remain curious.
I love it. I had a mentor like that says, your competitive advantage is to keep having fun.
Absolutely. I'm big on that as well.
Yeah. I have a duty to always be the most enthusiastic person in a room at work. And David, last cheeky question. If you were to give yourself advice 30 years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
It's a very interesting perspective, Romain. The advice that I'd give myself is just to back yourself more.
I like it.
And what I mean by that is that I think we all suffer from imposter syndrome to some degree. And perhaps earlier in my career, I think I suffered from that maybe more than perhaps what I should have. And I live by this maxim of just make it happen. Like, don't wait for other people. Don't look around, expect someone else to do it. Take the leadership role and make it happen for yourself. I think when you're too influenced by imposter syndrome, you perhaps don't take all those opportunities as readily.
I love it. David, thank you for joining me today at Future Pharma. If people wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way?
Roman, people can reach out to me on LinkedIn to further the conversation that we've had. I welcome engagements and contacts from people on that. And finally, just thank you for
pleasure.
the interesting conversation. I've enjoyed it.
Look forward to the next one.
Thank you.